Hello everyone, welcome to another installation of Phonetics 2, and this week we are going to be learning just one sort of new aspect. It's a little bit involved. It's a lot like the mixed endings, meaning we have to look at the morphology of the word. You have to sort of pay special attention to the ending and what comes before the ending, right? So because of that, that's going to be the only sort of new thing you're gonna be learning this week. I will, on the other hand, I will be including a link. As an attached document, um, 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 a recording to transcribes. That way you can kind of keep practicing on your transcription. There will be a correction to that, and you may have seen this document before, but you probably haven't completely transcribed it. So it's really important for you to have corrected transcription so that you can practice yourself. Now this is something that you can do by yourself, so that's and it's something that you should always be working on. So that you can do in parallel with what we're doing. So but this segment here will just be about a certain kind of endings, or I should say combinations of endings, and these are discussed on page 40 of your brochure. So you can perhaps hit pause, open your brochure, and what we will be discussing is the section in the appendix on page 40, listed as Appendix 5, derived adjectives in ative, right? Derived adjectives in ative. So if we look at ative, right? This is meaning, ative. It's important to say that ative is actually a combination of two endings. Here we have ative. It is actually ate, which we've seen before, plus ive, right? So ate plus ive. And ive is very similar to the mixed endings that we saw. Notice that are listed on the same page, page 40 of the brochure, as the adjectival endings, the ous, ar, al, ent, ant, in. These endings, where the way that they worked really depended on what happened before, namely if we had a consonant cluster, right? Meaning if we had if they were preceded by a double consonant, two consonants, the stress would be on the penultimate. But if they were not, if they were preceded by a single consonant, the stress would be given on the antepenultimate, the 100 stress pattern. So you can review that if you'd like. That is once again, that is on the top of page 40. And this is sort of a similar consideration insofar as if we're asking ourselves, how does IVE work, right? And once again, we have to say, well, it depends. It depends on the word that IVE is derived from, right? So this means we're looking at words that already have the ate suffix in them, right? They already have the ate suffix, and we're adding another suffix, the ive suffix. So that this does mean that we have to kind of review what we know about the ate suffix, right? So first of all, if you remember, there are different kind of cases, because ate behaves differently if it occurs in a two-syllable word or in a word that has more than two syllables. Now, we have spent some time, and we don't really need to review this fully, looking at the fact that ate assigns stress on the antepenultimate syllable, right? So this could be in a word like, and we're going to look at this word later. We've seen that in a word, let's say like communicate, right? You can hear it, but ba, communicate. That will be, the stress pattern will be O, 1, O, O. Communicate. I'm writing that here, right? So that means the ate, right, is a stress imposing ending, right, that assigns stress on the antepenultimate syllable. Now, what we saw before was that when communicate is a verb, right, that final 8 syllable will be pronounced as the long value, 8, right? And you're going to write the long value there. But notice that if it was not a verb, right, like a novitiate, right? We don't say novitiate, we say novitiate. And in both cases, ate will always assign stress on the antepenultimate syllable. Okay. So obviously, since ate assigns stress on the antepenultimate syllable, if we have a two-syllable word, we're going to have a different case, because there is no antepenultimate syllable on two words, because we can only really talk about antepenultimate syllables before the last when we have a word that is 3 syllables long. So that means in the first case we have, and this is, we're looking on page 40 here, right? Okay, is the one where we have, just a classic case of a word that has ate, right? Where the word has 3 or more syllables, right? And what happens is, if this is the case, when we add IVE, the place of stress in the original word will not change. And you can kind of hear it. It's as if, it doesn't mean that it is, it functions as if it's a neutral ending, right? In this specific case. We say communicate, and then if we add the IVE, we say communicative. Communicate, communicative, right? So I'll write that sort of stress pattern here. So if we write them next to each other, we can observe, right, here, that yes, in both cases, right, we can see that 1 over the U, right, in both cases, the stress occurs in the same place on the word, whereas we've added the IVE, right? Notice there is a difference in pronunciation. Notice that here we have an adjective derived from a verb. And as we have seen, communicate is verbal, that ate will be the long value, communicate, and you can hear it. And that's why it's difficult, because you kind of want to say communicate, but you don't, you say communicate, right? Because we hear that long value, and it's very rare, it's exceptional, that final non-stressed syllable will not be reduced. So that's one of the difficulties with that word. Notice here, adding IVE will make that 8 be pronounced as the reduced value as a schwa. So I say communicate, you can hear the 8 there, communicate. But when I say, well, add the IVE, that 8 becomes donc communicative, communicative. So communicate, communicative. You might want to hit pause and try saying that yourself, right? We're doing our little game that we usually do in class. So communicate, communicate, and then communicative. So we have the mun is the same, but there is a slight difference in pronunciation of the kate, right? Communicate, communicative. So that's a little bit sophisticated, and that's what we can call the first case that is given on page 40, right? That is what is explained with the same example on page 40. Notice they give some exceptions that don't follow this rule. For example, here we say demonstrate, but we don't say demonstrative, we say demonstrative. There's a shift in the place of the accent. Another case would be sort of indicate, but we say indicative. So once again, there's a shift. Then we say interrogate, but we say interrogative. Okay? We don't say interrogative. We say correlate, but we say correlative. And then we say alternate, but alternative. So there's a shift. So those 5, demonstrative, indicative, interrogative, correlative, and alternative, are exceptions. Okay. So here, so that's the first case. Now the second case is when we have the word in 8, right, is not a word with 3 or more syllables, like communicate, but it's a word that has, so that's case 1. Now we're moving on to case 2. In case 2, the word in 8 is a 2-syllable word, right? Okay. Now, if you remember, and this is given on page 39. This is the first appendix, words stressed on the final syllable, right? Okay. We have a reminder of what happens with ate and 2-syllable words. If we have a verb, we have the O1 stress pattern, like create, right? Whereas if we have a noun, and they're rarer, right? Like a word like le Sénat, we're going to say Senate. We're going to have the 1O stress pattern. Okay. Regardless, if we have a word that ends in ative, right, and it derives from a 2-syllable, usually it'll be a 2-syllable verb, right, the place of stress will change. We're going to have the 100 stress pattern, right? So that means, in the example given is going to be let's, for example, we're going to start with a two-syllable verb ending in ate. We're going to have negate, and that would be like sort of like nier, right? He negated his initial premise, right? Il a nié. Okay, so rendre caduc, something like that. So here we have the verb, two-syllable verb that ends in ate. We have the O1 stress pattern, right? So look what happens when we add the if here. So this is a different case. We revert to sort of the normal stress pattern, 100, right? We say negate, but we say negative, so 100. So negate, we get negative. So there, this time, negate, negative. There's a shift, right? Here it's on the first word we have the 8, and the second it's on the net. So that's the second case. So that just in one way, just a reminder, no change in accent when we have a word that has 3 or more syllables, the word in 8. But if we have derivation from a two-syllable word, there is a shift in accent towards it will be, in this case, it'll be towards the first syllable. Note that there is an exception, which is create. I say create, and I say creative. I don't say creative, right? I say create, creative. So that is an exception to the rule of there being a shift or displacement in accent towards the first syllable in ative words deriving from two-syllable verbs. So we're getting involved in a lot of subcases. You might want to watch this 2 times. It can get somewhat complicated. And then there's a third case, right? The third case is where we don't have real derivation. When I say real derivation, in the case of communicative and in negative, we can get rid of our if, and we can find the original immediately derived word, right? Meaning communicate. Communicative is derived from communicate. Negative is derived from negate. So there is an original word that ends in ate, right? But sometimes, right, this original word doesn't exist. These words that end in ative become, in a sense, they exist in and of themselves, which means that they perform sort of a model, and that we can, by assimilation or by sort of imitation, in a sense, create words that end in ative where there is no original word that ends in ate. And I'll give, and this is sort of, might help you to sort of discern a few words that you kind of make up. For example, we have the word, the example is a really good one here. We have the example of provoke, right? Donc, provoke. Now, when you're learning English, you might sort of say, oui, provoquer. You might think, oh, that would be provocate. But provocate doesn't exist, right? We have provoke. So here we have, we have our 1-0, we have a two-syllable verb with an inseparable prefix. So we have our O1 stress pattern, provoke. We don't have provocate, but we do have provocative, right? So this is just to show you what I was saying. What I was saying is, yes, sometimes we have a word that ends in ative, but the word does not immediately derive from a word in ate. It's sort of a shortcut from provoke to provocative, right? So what happens in this case is, notice there is no shift in the position of accent. Provoke, provocative. That means it's that second syllable that will be stressed. Voc, voc. Provoke, provocative. Now you will hear a little bit of a difference. This is where we're really looking at details here. You'll notice that when we say provoke, you might ask yourself it's a stressed O, right? It's a stress, that second syllable is stressed, provoke. Yes, and also you'll notice that you might ask yourself, as it's stressed, it's obviously either going to have the short, long, or the R-colored value. Typically. And here we have the long value, provoke. You can hear the O in provoke. It sounds just like the letter pronounced in isolation. So provoke, I'll write it, long value, which is that diphthong, right? Provoke, right? That is the long value for that stressed syllable. But here, when we have this type of derivation, right, the long values will become short. And that's why you hear that even though the syllable is still stressed, voc, voc, they're both stressed, right? The way that stressed syllable is pronounced will change, right? It's not going to be provocative, it's going to be provocative. So you might want to practice that, saying yourself, going provoke, provocative. And I could say, for example, invoke, évoquer, right? Invoke, invocative, provoke, provocative, invoke, provocative. So that will be the short value. That long value will become short in that stress syllable, even though the place of stress does not change. So that's really it for the new stuff. It would be a good idea for you to perhaps watch this video a few times, really kind of digest this information. And to practice on that, look on page 15. So we have looked on page 40 of our brochure. If you turn to page 15, you'll notice that on the top we have words stressed in words in ative, and you might want to practice doing those, okay, and making sure that you can sort of see what's going. Notice we have the first example is provocative speeches. Try to be able to identify those the words in ative and be able to, predict the way that they're pronounced. So that's it. And also, as I mentioned, also do those exercises, the practice on you already have, hopefully you should really be recycling all the exercises we've done in transcription, but do those exercises that I will send you on transcription. Great, thank you, take care.